I am Madison Miner with Protect Our Kids Say What podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I get to have an amazing guest with me. Her name is Seek Smith. She is the founder of Mom and Dad Army, and I'm just so grateful that she's given us her time today. So Seek, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to just share. I can't wait to have these conversations with you.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. I know what you've been doing is just so impactful, but a little bit hidden. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I think the first thing would be to start, what lit the fire underneath you to start Mom and Dad Army to protect kids against predators?
I'll go a little further back. About 15 years ago, I got activated around the issue of child trafficking. And it was, just in short, it was a really horrific case that I was hearing on talk radio on a drive home from work. And it just broke my mom heart into a million pieces that this was happening to children in the most violent and vile way. And from there, I just started to figure out my journey of where I can be helpful, So I have a background in event planning, PR, marketing, and branding. And so I offered that to an organization that I got connected to and started speaking up and speaking out way back when people thought this issue was a conspiracy.
Wait, what year was that? A couple years?
This was in 2010.
Oh, wow. A long time ago.
Yeah. 2010, before I was pregnant with my daughter. She just turned 15. So 15 years ago, that's what activated me. But Mom Army is more recent. My daughter was turning 11, and I'm from Los Angeles. I was raised in public school in LA, graduated from Crenshaw High School. It's where I met my husband. We met in high school. And then my older boys, both, LA public schools. And with my daughter at the time and during COVID and everything, I started to see really strange policies coming down, from Sacramento and a couple other things. But it was like a perfect storm. We had an opportunity to relocate to Arizona, and we took that opportunity for my husband's job. And I didn't want to raise our daughter in California anymore because of the writing that was on the wall. And so when we moved here, I just decided to get really activated. I said, I don't want to have to pack up and figure out what's the next state we have to flee to. And so I dug my heels in and wanted to get really involved. And Mom Army was just a natural progression of my activism and my advocacy work for victims and for children. And I was realizing that kids were under attack. And the only way I could describe it was I was feeling after COVID, especially, that the education system, the medical system, entertainment, like every institution that we're supposed to trust, all of a sudden was coming after our children. And I rallied, I've been working across the country with different advocates and different people. And my husband was like, why don't you get everyone together and speak with one voice? And essentially that's what happened with Mom Army. So August 8th of 2022, we launched on Instagram with about 100 moms. And it just kind of took off from there. And I started getting messages from all over the world. I was getting messages from moms in Peru and Spain and New Zealand and Ireland. And they were all saying the same thing. They were like, it's happening here too. So it was something that was beyond my understanding at the time, that the attacks on our children was global. And from there, we just started, figuring out where we could be, effective and where we can make change. So we started doing nationwide rallies. We did the Cancel Balenciaga rally. We got 20 cities together for that in December of 2022. I did a rally against the American.
What happened with Balenciaga?
If for those that don't know, back then there was this marketing campaign that sexualized children. Basically, there was a little child holding a teddy bear that was dressed in BDSM gear, and the paraphernalia that was all over the table was very suggestive and very sexual. And there was a wine glass, and it's just inappropriate and the child must have been 4 or 5 in this campaign. So there was a big uproar, and our group we couldn't be silent about it. And we organized, I think in 5 days, I think that happened on a weekend. We announced a campaign on Monday, and then Saturday we had the protest. And we made lots of, we were in lots of news and coverage. Daily Mail did a story about our protest. Sky News Australia did a segment about it. And so we found that we could be effective, in that kind of organized nationwide campaigns. So then the following year we did Stop the War on Children. That was 35 cities. And then last year we did a candlelight vigil for the trafficked migrant children at the border. And we did that in 16 cities. But we found that, if you give people a platform to speak up, they will take the reins on that. So we've had moms in our group that has gone to state capitals to testify against bills, for bills, at school board meetings, at protests. So wherever we can use our voice is kind of like our mantra.
Yeah, I remember having your representation at school board meetings when I was on the Orange Unified Board, and it was wonderful partnering with you guys. And I'm just so grateful for the organization in general, but just for the specific people that were there supporting me. It was amazing to see just how big Mom Army and Dad Army is. So Mom Army started in 2022. When did Dad Army start? Shortly thereafter? And why did you feel like you needed to start that as well?
Yeah, it was August of 2022. So we're coming up on our 3rd-year anniversary. Dad Army was just a couple months after. We were getting messages from men and dads all over the world as well. And thank you for doing what you're doing. We support you. And we started to get like small dollar donations from some of the dads. And my husband, who is very, this is very much his issue as well, was struggling, in building community with other men. And he had been part of other men's group, but he always felt that there was something missing. Like a lot of these men groups would cover, your health and your relationship and finance and all these areas of your life. But he was like, it didn't have the heart and the purpose behind it. So so that was kind of like me filling that void that he was asking for when he would be in these men's groups. And I'm like, well, let's do that. Let's have a Dad Army. And, we're one of the few groups that actually has a specific dedicated to men and dad group. So that's been wonderful, to have men and dads represented because they really don't have a platform the way moms have platforms. So we're grateful for them. And they are de facto our security detail as well.
Oh, yeah, which unfortunately you need right now.
Yeah.
So you've been so vocal about the growing threats for children in both the real world as well as online. Can you explain the biggest misconception that parents still have about child exploitation today? Yeah.
So, we tend to latch on to these narratives that can be misconstrued. A lot of it is done through Hollywood. We think of like the movie Taken, right? Like, some kid gets kidnapped off the street. Like that happens. And we're seeing that more and more as like there's more camera surveillance, in public streets and things like that. You're starting to see these videos that are capturing abductions, right? But the truth is more than 90% of child trafficking, child sexual abuse is within the familial setting, which means it's somebody the child knows, right? It could be, a family member, sadly a parent, a father, a mother. But with the new age of social media and technology, predators and pedophiles have way quicker access to our children. They don't have to, groom a child at a park. They can just DM your child. If your child's on social media or on a game app, they could be messaging and chatting with your child. So parents need to understand that the accessibility to your children is everywhere. Every child is susceptible. Even the ones like my daughter, who we talked to about this. She was born into my activism. She's been to protests and gala fundraisers and all of that. And even with her, because children are malleable, they don't know and they don't realize like what's happening. So we have to talk to our children and educate them and put the safeguards that's necessary to keep, these predators from accessing our children. But online is the way that they are going. It's the most dangerous place for a child right now. You don't you don't have your child walk through a dark alley, but a lot of parents are allowing their kids to be on the dark alleys of the internet.
Well, and along those same lines, I think a lot of parents, again, ignorance, like I think they just don't recognize the fact that it is like a dark alley. That's such a perfect analogy for it. But I've noticed that a lot of parents even feel overwhelmed or paralyzed with fear when it comes to this whole new world. We didn't deal with this. I didn't have internet until I was in my early teens. And so our parents didn't have to deal with the kind of stuff that we do now. And it is a whole new world. And there's a lot, of apps and stuff like that that kids have access to that us parents maybe aren't super familiar with. So what would you say to the parents that say this could never happen to my child?
Like I mentioned earlier, even for someone like me, I think of myself, right? I'm highly aware and I'm speaking out against it. I'm working on policies related to these issues. But even for someone like me, we had our daughter on a gaming app, and she ended up being, having chats with predators online. And so even though we tell her like, hey, don't talk to strangers, make sure everybody who's playing with you is people you know in real life and all of that. And kids just don't know. They don't think of these dangers the way we do, right? Oftentimes, especially teenagers, they think we're overreacting, right? They think that we're being paranoid. I've heard that a lot from my daughter. Your mom, you're just being paranoid, and it is our job first and foremost to protect our children. So I always err on the side of safety. I err on the side of putting these safeguards and these barriers in place because it just takes one time. And there's horrific stories of kids being trafficked from Instagram. Like within 30 minutes, a child can go missing. I know it sounds crazy, but I mean, there's a story, and this is through our friend Heidi Chance, who's a detective here in the Phoenix area, who was also doing undercover work when it comes to trafficking. But she will say that within minutes, I mean, your child could be messaged by a predator. And a lot of times they're watching, they're looking to befriend your child. They're looking for that opening, right? Your child might be posting something like, oh, I got into a fight with my mom. She won't let me go to this party, or she won't let me do this or something. Then this person knows exactly what to say, right? In order to become that child's friend and to gain the trust. So they build the trust, and it's all part of the grooming process. And then before you know it, that child gets a message and goes, hey, I'll come pick you up for a party. And your child doesn't know. And then all of a sudden, the child goes missing. And those are real cases. Those are cases that have actually happened.
Well, and so child trafficking and the word grooming have become such popular words to be used today. I don't remember this as much. I mean, my mom would say, oh, don't, go to that unmarked van, right? But it wasn't the same. And so I know many people still do not understand what that actually looks like in a child's life. So can you walk us through how predators maybe operate on a daily basis?
Yeah. The one thing that parents also need to understand is they start with grooming the family and grooming you before they even get to the child. So they want to test out and make sure that they can befriend you. And, so they come very charming. They don't look like monsters, in an alley or some creepy looking guy. A lot of times they're very slick and very, contributors to our society. They could be coaches. They could be, church leaders. I mean, they infiltrate, our society in areas that they can have access to children. And then two, they start to build the trust and start grooming the family first before they start grooming the child. And they'll usually look for vulnerabilities. I've watched lots of these interviews with convicted sex offenders and pedophiles. Well, they'll say they look for a father figure, right? They look if there's a strong protective father, they won't even bother because that's too much work for them. So they go for in areas where that child may not have that very protective environment because it's easier for them. So parents need to be a threat to these people. Yeah. Like outwardly and overtly be a threat.
Right. And I remember even having a friend of my mom's who was a single mom, had 5 kids, and 3 of them were still at home. And this guy met her, found out she had kids, gained her trust. And then immediately, she trusted him so much that she started, going grocery shopping and leaving him home alone with her kids. And it escalated, right, to where she'd leave for a little bit longer and a little bit longer, but always just a day, like a couple hours. And then come to find out a couple of months down the road that he was taking advantage. He was molesting her children. And something that she remembers, and I'm sure you're familiar with this as well, is that her kids told her that he told them that they had to keep the secret from their mom or she would be so disappointed. She'd be so mad at them. Do you find that happens often with the cases that you hear?
Yeah, that's a textbook situation. It's pretty standard for these predators to do exactly what you just, laid out here. I think the important thing to understand, and this is not to shame anybody, I think we all are just trying to do the best that we can. But I think the more people are aware of these things and they're looking out for these signs, I have many survivor friends who were in the same situation. A stepdad, right, comes into their life and, dates the mom. And then all of a sudden, they build the trust and all these other things. So one thing I will always say is you have to believe the child, because children can't make these things up. There's horrific stories of survivors that their parents or their mom didn't believe them when they disclose. And the keeping the secret is a big one. That's really it's always under threat and coercion or keeping secrets, that if you let the secret out, something could happen to your family. So there's a lot of threats wrapped around the secrecy, which is what keeps the child in fear, right? And not disclosing, because, in their mind and in their little world, they think that that's exactly what's going to happen. And so we have to teach our children that there are no secrets, and if and I always try to talk about secrets versus surprises, like when there's a surprise birthday party, right? So having them understand the language and the definition of each things and speaking to children in very proper terms, when it comes to their body parts and protecting them, they need to know that their body is their temple, that no one is allowed to invade that space.
Absolutely. So if I were a child, if I was your child, Seek, and you were talking to me about secrets versus surprises, what would you say to me?
Yeah, there are no secrets, right? Like if anybody tells you to keep a secret, the first thing a child should do is go and tell somebody that they trust. And hopefully that's the parent. But we do know there's lots of cases where the parent is actually the abuser. But the child needs to find a very safe adult that they can disclose to and that they would not get in trouble. That's the other thing. They're worried about getting in trouble when they tell. And so you have to language it and assure the child that what they need to do is the best thing that they could do and that they wouldn't get in trouble for it, that they don't keep secrets and they will not get in trouble for it.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because we might have people watching this podcast right now that maybe haven't had those conversations. Maybe their children are a little bit younger, or maybe they just never came up in conversation. So I think it's so important to give advice when it comes to that, those topics. I just think there's a lot of people that maybe have their head in the sand a little bit, or they just haven't had the opportunity yet. So thank you for that. So with that, there's systems that are failing in our country. We've got education problems. We have CPS problems, tech platforms. What are some other avenues, and how have you been working on a bigger scale, maybe on the government side of things, to help protect our kids?
I mean, that's the one thing we've learned in the last 3 years is you can do these protests. It brings awareness, which is great. To your point, yeah, these conversations are happening more often, right? People are talking about grooming. They're talking about trafficking. So it's good. It's good that people are having these conversations out in the open. It's becoming more of a national conversation. That's the first step, awareness, right? But then what we realized too is that as we were protesting and we were speaking at school boards and speaking at, state capitals, that's another way, to have your voice be heard. But we have always taken pride in being an organization that wants to make real change and be effective. And what I started to realize is, it doesn't matter how often you can speak to your blue in the face. Sometimes, a lot of times it falls on deaf ears. And this as a school board member, right? That a lot of times your hands are tied, or you just, on the school board are people that don't subscribe to the same value system that you have. What we realize is we need to have the right people in these seats, right? We need good, moral people to sit in these positions that can make these decisions on our behalf. So we're learning that policy is really important. So that's the realm that we like to operate in, is we say legislative activism. Ways to do that is to build relationships with your lawmaker, build allyship, build relationships with those that align with your values so that you can have influence over policy, and you can start to introduce a bill. If you see that there's a gap or a void or a loophole that needs to be closed, figure out, with your legislative body what you can do. And half the battle is just showing up. What I realize is if people make it seem harder, but really, if you start to show up and you start to build these relationships, you start to build trust, and you start to, have influence with our legislators. So that's the realm we like to operate in. And we're trying to do more by training our leaders to run for office. So we've got some upcoming trainings this fall to prepare for the 2026 midterm. We just want to be a platform that gives people a voice wherever that may be. It could be just speaking at a school board, but it might be that you might want to run for school board. Some of the initiatives we're working on right now, we've backed other initiatives. My friend Kaylee Kozak, who used to live here in Arizona, she has Kaylee's Law. So we were working with, we helped pass Ava's Law here in Arizona. It's a law to protect children from predators, especially in a school setting. We backed the Prop 313, which is a ballot initiative that makes the selling and buying of children a life sentence. So making sure that there are harsher penalties, right? We do stuff at the state level, but we also do stuff at the national level. I was just in DC last week for a press conference. This one specifically to protect parents and our parental rights. During the last administration, parents were deemed domestic terrorists by Merrick Garland from the DOJ.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, they put out this memo calling parents domestic terrorists just for speaking up for your children. And so we have a lot of parents in our group and our various coalition that have been targeted. And so I should talk to you offline about this, but we've been putting together a database and a dossier, basically. And so we are working to get an executive order from the Trump administration on rectifying, the targeting of parents and restoring people's lives, because a lot of people lost their jobs, their reputation was smeared. Awful things, criminal records, you name it, hit pieces in LA Times, So for us, it's about the family, right? Like, how do we preserve families? The bedrock of our society, of a healthy society, is a healthy family and an intact family. And what they've been doing is trying to dismantle that. That's a very Marxist, socialist, communist tactic. It's been done over and over throughout history. And if we could see it in that lens, we'll understand what we're up against. It was very exciting. I'm part of the Parents Demanding Justice Alliance with my friend Kelly Walker, who is, sadly, the poster child for a targeted parent. He's part of our Dad Army. He co-founded the group with Sam Sorbo. That name sounds familiar.
Yeah. I watched Hercules.
Yeah, her husband, Kevin. But she's very vocal in the homeschooling space and just protecting families. So we were all in D.C. For a press conference asking the Trump administration to work on executive order to rectify what happened to parents. We can't let that go into a memory hole.
No.
People always they think, oh, that was 4 years ago. Who cares? Move on. And it's not just 4 years ago, though. That's how it started. We still have parents being targeted to this day. And to your point about all the different systems, right, that are corrupt and that we're having to fight against, everything from CPS to the family court system, right, to the education system and entertainment. And, So I'm proud to be part of that alliance, and we're getting some traction. The last update I got that it is moving up the chain, and it's getting up to some very, very high ups in the Trump administration to consider this executive order. So I'm hoping my next trip to DC is to stand behind Trump to have him sign this executive order. But we want there to be restitution. People, like I said, lost their jobs. They've gotten financial, they've been impacted in so many ways, and losing friends and family and reputation. So we want to try and make them whole again for what has happened to them. And it's basically the weaponization of our government against parents. Yeah.
When I was on the school board and we passed a parent notification policy, in fact, that's when I met Mom and Dad Army, was at that meeting, that board meeting, and we were able to pass it. The intention was to give parents, the number one advocate for their kids, the opportunity to simply have a conversation with their children. And that was frowned upon by the left so heavily. And I couldn't understand. It wasn't us stopping these kids from doing what they wanted to do. It was us simply giving parents that chance to talk to their kids about the problems that they were experiencing or the confusion that they had. And so I'm a huge fan. I'm so grateful for you guys going to DC and rallying, because there's a lot of folks that were affected, and I think there's a lot of people who feel like they don't have a voice, or they feel intimidated and they can't go to school board meetings and such, similar situations like that, because they feel like they're just going to be labeled and ostracized because of it.
I think that was the intention, right? That memo from Merrick Garland and the administration, the Biden administration, was to target parents who were being outspoken, and that had a chilling effect, right? It made examples of parents who were outspoken, and all of a sudden you have other parents who are just like, well, I'm not going to jump into that fray. Like, I don't want to be targeted. I don't want to be smeared. I don't want to be called names. I don't want to lose my job. And rightfully so. I'm not faulting any of the parents who have remained silent, but it has caused a chilling effect, to keep parents from speaking up and speaking out. And in the United States of America, that's not who we are.
No.
We don't intimidate people from exercising their First Amendment rights.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. So what role do you think parents need to reclaim that institutions have taken over?
Yeah, and this goes back to what I said earlier. I think for so long we were just trying to raise our families, right? Run our business, raise our families. And we just we blindly trusted these institutions. I did. I was blindly trusting the medical system. I was blindly trusting the education system. And then once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? You can't unsee the horrible things that have been operating, behind the veil, once you lift that veil. So my message to parents is, whatever way you feel that you can make a change, like we all have our area and what I call our lane, right? Use the gift that you have. For some people, it is being more vocal. Some people, they're behind the scenes. We have people who just love to do research, and love to help in other ways. So we're no longer in a place where we can do nothing, right? Because doing nothing got us to where we're at, right? Being silent got us to where we're at. Trusting the system blindly has gotten us here. And so I implore everyone to get involved in it. Nothing's too small, right? It could be as simple as supporting a candidate running for office. That could be one way you can do it. You don't have to always be a front-facing, being out there. So many of us could do things, and we could do things quietly in the background as well. Yeah. So I just ask everyone to search deep and figure out like what their calling is, what's important to them, and then from there, connect. The best way to do this is to connect with people and have conversations. Find a group. If it's not Mom Army, there's so many amazing groups out there. There's Moms for Liberty and Moms for America, Independent Women's Network. I work with all of these groups. I'm friends with a lot of leaders in these groups. A lot of them here in Arizona. I work with the state directors of some of these groups. But do that. You're not alone. I think a lot of times we feel like we're so alone, and this is, you don't know anybody else in your everyday life that's either feeling the same way you're feeling or going through the same things you're going. You have to find that community that understands you, and then you work together.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Okay, so going back to kind of the signs and the red flags that parents maybe can recognize, what are some red flags that you have seen in any kind of situations with child trafficking or grooming, and how can parents be more aware of what's going on with their own child?
I would always, talk to, have the open communication. Allow your child that safe space with you that they can share without getting in trouble, without being chastised, without being shamed, without being judged, right? That's the first thing you need to do is create that environment for your child. Watch for changes. I mean, children who are being impacted with bullying or with, abuse, you'll see a change. They all of a sudden are reclusive, right? They go within, or the eye contact is a big one, when children are being abused. So I would look for signs of changes, and figuring out, like, a lot of times there's something happening in the background and you need to get to the root cause of it. Like I said, creating a safe environment for your child to be able to come to you more than anything else.
Yeah. How can parents safeguard their homes? How can they protect their own homes, their own families from exploitation and the potential of trafficking?
There's so many, there's so many wonderful resources. Honestly, as much as I think, social media has its bad parts, especially for children when they're not quite equipped and ready to use the platforms. My daughter's 15. She doesn't have social media, and she's not going to have social media. That's a choice we've made in our household. She has safeguards on her phone and restrictions. That's one way to do it. And you still, I think the hardest thing, especially in the teenage years, is giving your children some freedom to find their independence and to find their identity, but at the same time, making safety your number one priority, right? And so those are the choices we made in our household and for our family. And I would highly suggest that. And sometimes you just have to have the conversation. And I'll share this one with, she was going to homecoming last year. And we're usually the parent that always drives all the kids everywhere and stuff. So my husband and I took them to their dance. We picked them up and they were all, giggling in the back like normal teenage girls about, photos that they took, and they all shared it on Snapchat. So I looked at my daughter's face and I could tell she's like, oh, well, I'm not, And then the girls realized, like, oh, Dylan's not on Snapchat. Let's text it to her in a group text. And that's all it took, and once we dropped the girls off, I had the conversation with her. I said, I know, how do you feel that you don't have Snapchat? And they were sharing pictures on Snapchat, but then they realized, they needed to text it to you. She's like, I'm fine, So I think I had to help her reiterate and help her understand that there's a reason why we don't want you on Snapchat. That's where predators go, and so she understands it. She's not upset about it. She knows that, we are doing this, for her best interest and for her protection. So we don't fight about it. She doesn't argue about it. She's not mad at us about it. She understands because we have open conversations about it. So I would just say clear communication, making protection of your child a priority, looking for signs, I teach her very, very frankly who she surrounds herself with, right? Choosing your friends carefully, making sure that the people that you surround yourself with lifts you and makes you feel good about yourself. They're not people who are, tearing you down or who are getting into trouble. So giving them those tools and the understanding of how important it is to surround yourself with the right people, especially in this, in the teenage years and stuff. So those are, I think those are, and then finding resources, right? Making sure that you're staying up with the information when it comes to protecting children. So if you're on social media, there's so many amazing pages to follow. A lot of the nonprofits that are protecting children. There's Operation Light Shine. There's protecting. Oh gosh, I'll have to send these to you, and I'd love for you to put in your show notes. But I'll give you some
we can put it down
resources
below for sure.
Yeah, and so for me, it's following people who've been in the fight. I love following Jaco Bugné. I love following Victor Mark. I love following just anybody who's using their platform to educate, and to protect. That's there's so much more information at our fingertips than it was when we were growing up.
Yeah. Well, and Snapchat, that's one app. And I've heard horrific stories about Snapchat just with sexploitation, with, saying, oh, send me that nude picture. And then the child does. And then they take the screenshot. Now they have this nude photo they thought it could just erase. But sometimes if you can do a screenshot fast enough, unfortunately, now it's out there. And so what are some other apps that are harmful that parents should be aware of and why? And then after that, can you share maybe some apps that parents can use to safeguard their kids' devices, cell phones, laptops, iPads, whatever that may look like?
Yeah, so some of the gaming apps are some of the worst, and some of the messaging apps. So like Discord, Roblox, obviously Snapchat.
I knew you were going to say Roblox.
Yeah. Roblox, that was the one that, our daughter was on. And, a lot of what parents don't know is that they can turn on their location. And if a child doesn't know to keep their location off, that predator actually could pinpoint where that child is, And I've heard, I think it was on Instagram where somebody drove up to someone's house because they were able to figure out the location and it was on video. But So those, and the usual suspects, right? A lot of the social media apps and things. I am a proponent that kids shouldn't have social media. Honestly, I think, it should be 18 and over, and we should be teaching courses, and allowing children to understand like how to use it and what to use it. When my oldest he'll be 27. When he was 14, he says, "Mom, I want Facebook." I said, "Okay. Let's talk about Facebook." So we had a 2-hour conversations about how to use Facebook and what it's for and what it's not for, and how whatever you put on the internet is going to be there forever. And when you're looking for a job later in life, your employer can go and find out the things you said from 5 years ago. Literally, I think I scared my boys into having social media. Neither one of them uses it, except my oldest one uses it for his consulting business now and for his his sci-fi novel. But casually using social media, neither one of my sons ever, was involved in that. Yeah. So I think it had a lot to do with the conversations we have. And I wasn't trying to scare them. I just wanted to equip them and let them know, like, if you're going to use Facebook, this is what you use it for, and this is how you can get into trouble, when using Facebook.
Well, we in Orange Unified, unfortunately, with the recall, we flipped the board, or they flipped the board really, and now it says 0-7 leftist majority. And some new principles are now coming in that the new superintendent, who's an outspoken activist, brought in. And you can easily go on their Facebook profiles and see, their pictures with whatever logos are in the background that what those are standing for. And so it's very public and it's not easily wiped away. And so I applaud you for giving your kids that information. So, okay, you mentioned Snapchat.
Yeah, so those are the dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And then, and safeguarding. I mean, there's so much technology out there now, and one of the things, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but, Gab wireless, there are phone. My daughter has a phone. She has a smartphone. She has an iPhone, but my husband has a lot of safeguards. Like her phone shuts off at a certain time, so she can't be on the phone at night in her room. It's dead, it's shut off. Then it comes back on in the morning. She could only use it for emergency calls. She can, even when the phone is off on that setting at night, she can call us, or she can, so it's only certain contacts that you can set it to. And usually for us, it's just me, my husband and I are the emergency contacts, and her brother. So there's so many parameters, safeguard parameters, but Gab wireless is a good one, especially if you need to give your child, a small child. I always say, if you can, give them the watch, and make sure they don't have internet access, so that because it's always the excuse. Parents are like, well, I need to get a hold of my child. I'm like, yeah, there's so many ways to do that without giving them internet access, and keeping them away from these platforms that can harm them. And then, there are companies that help you set that up, as well. And so I'll definitely share those resources with you. Sometimes it's like not I can't access that at the top of my head sometimes.
Yeah, no, if you can send us the list, we'll put it inside this video so people can kind of freeze screen and see it. That's great. So Mom and Dad Army, you emphasize building a network of bold parents. How do people get plugged in with you, and what can they expect once they do?
Well, for us, it's, we're very active on Instagram. We do have a Twitter account, not as active there, but definitely Instagram is where you can DM us. I check, and a couple other people on our team check our DMs regularly. So if you have, anything, we've had all kinds of messages, what's going on in their school. And we get a lot of intel from our followers, and they share a lot of things that we love to help expose things if, you just want someone that has a reach and a platform to do that. So DMing us is the quickest way to get a hold of us. If you're wanting to get involved, I always tell people Mom Army exists to support you and what you're doing. So we're always looking for people who are already outspoken, who are leaders in their community, and they just need reinforcement, and they need a community to plug in with. And that's what we're really good at, is providing that extra support, for what you're doing. So it looks different for everybody. We have some people in our group that are very vocal at their city council. So we want to help support that, or they're vocal, in other areas and things like that. So it's, the best way to put it is come as you are. And then we're here to support what you're doing locally. That's
wonderful. Thank you. So when the battle feels overwhelming, what keeps you grounded and motivated?
For me, it's I have a very obsessive practice in gratitude. It's easy to feel like the role is really dark because it is. I'm not going to lie. This is a really dark space to be in when you're talking about exploitation of children and things that I learn on a daily basis. I learned to not be connected or absorb a lot of that, consuming this. You have to shield your heart and your soul from the terrible news that comes at you on a regular basis. So for me, I just have daily practices that keeps me grounded. I go out and get some sun. The other day, it's actually been a little nice here in Arizona, even though it's in the summer and it's always scorching hot. The evenings have been kind of nice the last few days. So I just go lay on the grass, look at the stars, find the things that bring you joy. We teach a lot of our leaders, the reason why we do this is for our children. So go hug your children extra tight today and, go spend time with them. So doing things that can take you away from the darkness of all of this stuff, knowing these things, but not consuming it and not holding onto it.
And I know you've seen so much, and I know you've been fighting this fight for so long now. I didn't realize it was since 2010. That's incredible. Mm-hmm. So can you share a story maybe of a rescue or a moment when you knew that this fight was still worth fighting?
I mean, I think for me, I see my own children, that they get to be in a safe home. And I wish that for every child. I wish every child can be in a loving environment and can be in a safe environment. They deserve that, and we all need to fight for that. And the only way to overcome evil is to overwhelm it with goodness, overwhelm it with, with people who care. Interestingly enough, where we operate is kind of on the two ends of this fight. The prevention side is, a lot of our work, and, equipping parents, equipping kids. And then the legislative side, which is like the far end of this work, right? I was speaking at an anti-trafficking conference less than a month ago in Northern California called Rev 17. And then right after that, I did a training with ARC. It's the Association of Recovery of Children. Basil Boz and his wife Tina are this incredible team, and they do unspeakable rescue operations and stuff. And so I did their training. It was a 6-day, more than 50-hour training, and got certified for that. And what I learned there is how to run an operation. So they actually teach you what it actually looks like to carry out an operation where you rescue kids and what to do, and building your network so that that child has a safe house to go to and that child has aftercare. So I've never done a rescue myself, but just partnering and working with groups that do that and having a better understanding drives me to do a lot of the prevention work. Because if we can prevent it, then the guys that have to go rescue will have less kids to rescue if we can help prevent it.
What is something that you would say to a predator if you were able to see them face to face?
Oh gosh, this is where I have to bring in. I've had to do a lot of work, and because, it's one of those issues that bring out the worst in you, right? That brings out this anger, that brings out this outrage, and rightfully so, because children are so precious and they're a gift from God, and we need to do everything to protect them. I have learned, this sounds crazy. I never thought I would be here because I was always death penalty and all this other stuff. Absolutely, I'm still for all of that, the harsh punishment. But what I've learned too is that a lot of, not all of them, but there are predators that were victims themselves. So we always have to ask, what was the root cause, right? And this is no excuse for a predator, because I know victims who didn't become predators. So everybody gets to choose the path that they take. So just because you were abused as a child does not give you the right to become a predator yourself. You would think it would be the complete opposite, but sadly, a lot of people, it's like the old adage, right? Do you become the hero or the villain? Some people choose the hero path, and then some people choose the villain path. So if I were to sit in front of somebody, I would ask them to go back to being a child. What was it like for you to be a 5-year-old, and I would want to take them on a journey of why we should protect the 5-year-old version of you, the 8-year-old version of you. And I think the more we have these human conversations to understand why it is all of our responsibility to protect children. And we just need to do a better job at punishing and deterring these acts. against children. Right now, our justice system and our criminal system does not, it's always favoring. I found, this is going to be shocking to a lot of people because it was shocking to me. I have a friend whose daughter was sexually abused at 4 years old by a teenage boy in the neighborhood. Come to find out, he had like 20 other victims. So he was prolific, and he wasn't even 18 yet. And found out that after the conviction, he never served time in jail because he was a juvenile, but also resources. The predator has tons of free resources. They get free therapy and they get all kinds of resources. The victim, she had to pay for therapy for her own daughter out of her own pocket. So we have to fix that. We have to find ways to really create a system that is supportive of the victim and helping them reclaim their life and rebuild their life. Because people, this is soul crushing and it shatters people's lives. And I am determined, from a policy side to really fix some of these things that will allow victims to have more resources and more help to heal, instead of focusing on the predator. It's not a crime that can be rehabilitated. It's one of those crimes that I don't know if it can be rehabilitated. They can't.
Yeah, they can't undo that, right? Once you've gone down that path. Seek, we believe that every child is made in the image of God, and I know you believe that too, and they are worthy of protection and purity and peace. Seek, thank you. Thank you so much for what you do with Mom Army and Dad Army, and we are going to include in the closing credits here just how you can get involved, how you can contact Seek and Mom Army and Dad Army online through Instagram, through DM. And I just thank you. Thank you for being on with me today.
Oh my God. Thanks for the conversation and the opportunity. I appreciate you shedding light on, these horrific things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. We won't stop. We won't stop until we get policies in place that protect these kids. Absolutely. So thank you. Thank you so much for watching this podcast of Say What Podcast on Protect Our Kids. We do have social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, we have X. We also have our podcasts on Rumble as well as on YouTube, and we would love for you to watch them. I encourage you to stay involved, have those conversations with your children that are difficult and uncomfortable, because as Seek just explained, it's so important. This is the time and this is the place. It's never going to feel like the right time and right place, but this is the time and the place to have those conversations with your kids so that you make sure that you are protecting them and you're protecting their future. So thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time.